Just start. All right. Uh-oh. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. This is
Yes.
beautiful.
Well, we're getting into my love of budget and finance. A little brief intro about me. You guys already know I have my bachelor's in business management, but business and finance started for me back in high school. I was in the academy of business and finance, and I've always been intrigued with, just anything under that umbrella with business and finance. And I've always dealt with some type of job that's dealing with dollar signs and trying to calculate and find an answer to something. It's like a puzzle to me. So that's where my heart is, business and finance. But knowing that I could do that and serve the college community is really my niche right now. So I'm glad I'm able to expand on just being business and finance and be able to make a change in the college community. So the wonderful thing about a budget, you have to be worried about recurring expenditures without recurring revenue. So you can't keep on spending money without making sure that your budget aligns with the revenue. So that's one of the hardest parts of my job. Where people want to spend, but they don't look at the overall picture of where the money's coming from. Yes, money might be coming from tuition and fees, but we have to take other things into account when we're initializing a budget. So looking at the expenses that we have recurring costs, which are ongoing commitments. And at our university, at our institution, we call those recurring expenses, part of the operating budget, ongoing, and they are normally salaries, leases, subscriptions, and contracts, and they are consistent um, expenses that need the funding. Then we have a category of one-time money, which are for one-time expenses, and those are from sometimes the one-time money might come from grants, but we have surplus funds, which is the plant funds or the reserves I talked about, and temporary boosts maybe from foundations. So we don't count that towards funding our permanent expenses. And then there's a mismatch with structural deficient, so spending more than you could rely on, which leads to a burden of stress and could cause a crisis. So not knowing that you have these recurring expenses each operating year could put a strain on all of the initiatives that you want to do moving forward for programs and services. You have to think of the long run. And then institutional strategy, we look at that as what are we aligning our recurring costs with our budget? Are we overspending? Are we underspending? What is the logical way of really right sizing a budget? So, with the deficit going on in the state and local counties, we had to analyze maybe one division's way of spending for the last 3 years. We've had to think about what are you spending now? The actual spending compared to a year ago. Is it really realistic of what you're asking for your budget moving forward for the fiscal year? So we take an analysis of what is actually going on with the spending and then tie it into the strategic mission to figure out, okay, does this align with a year from now, 2 years from now, with salaries, with just anything? Because people just think that assume that there's a guaranteed big pot of money and we can't have it. And then we also have an area where, those initiatives that do tie into the strategic plan, they're going to be one-time funds for one-time needs. We stipulate to people, if you think it's going to be a one-time program, that's fine. But if it's going to be reoccurring, we need to know so we can put it in our budget and keep it in mind. Okay, this program might have a chance to succeed. And then reassess the budget health regularly. So we look at those mid-year spendings. We check quarterly. Hey, this area requested maybe 100,000. Are they using it to the best of their needs? Can this money be moved to another program? Okay, they're asking for these supplies, but they haven't spent it. So we look at every line of our budget and detail it based on the departments, the division needs, and the overall picture for the institution. Like I said, when I presented for the Leadership Academy at my college, they did ask in detail, why do some areas that make the revenue, why can't it go directly to their cost center as revenue? And I said, the college as a whole, and then you have the divisions that do institutional support that are non-revenue areas. So we can't just say, the Department of Learning gets all the money because they bring the students in. It doesn't work like that, because they're a percentage of the revenue, not the whole picture. So it has to go to the whole university because we're all working towards the student needs. Okay. So based on what I was talking about revenues, this gives us a picture of what operating fiscal year will look like. This is just the operating budget. So I took the percentages because I had to have this visual picture for, people to understand how the pieces of the puzzle come together. So a fraction of our I'll start with reserves. Reserves is that small amount that I talked about, the plant fund, fund balance. That's like for the one-time needs, and everything else that if we have a deficit with our budget, which we've had, it's public information, but my college was one of the two that suffered through the deficit, from the state. So that kind of cut into our fund balance. So that's going to knock it down significantly. Um, so we have that little piece of a pie, that 1% of reserves. Miscellaneous is 3%, and that represents space rental, leases. Oh gosh, I can't even think right now. What else is that? Not subscriptions, but right now we'll say leases and facilities rental. And then county support, again, it's like that 30%, and this could be drastically reduced based on what is approved next week by the state. And then that whole area for revenues where people were talking about, hey, why doesn't a portion of course and fees go towards this area? Why can't it go towards my cost center? This has to be a part of that whole 100% of the budget for those non-revenue areas. And then state aid is 32%. And again, this was drastically reduced based on what we from the deficit that we receive. And that deficit came from the CAID fund calculation. And that's with 16 of the Maryland community colleges. So we get a small pot of money, and we have to split it 16 ways based on the FTEs, which is the student head counts for the last, I think they did a 2 or 3 year average. Are there any questions while I'm moving through this?
Yeah. Which year is it for, Kathryn?
Oh, this is our new fiscal year for fiscal year 26. Because I couldn't go back to do it for 25. I had the visuals up for 20
Okay, okay.
26.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I can see your county support is a little
yeah.
higher than state. So state is just somehow slipping away.
Yeah, it is. And we received for FY 25, it
Mm,
was a drastic reduction of 700,000.
yeah,
So this is two
pretty
years in a
bad.
row we've been hit. So add that
Yeah.
up, that's one point
Hmm.
almost a million. So
Right, right. Yeah. Traditionally, state has been the biggest supporter for community colleges.
mhm.
Now we can see the changing scenario.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're concentrating before we go into expenses. I guess each college president is different, but our main focus is looking at our revenues to see how far we could get into creating a budget for expenses. So that has been a main struggle this year. Um, Trying to right size the expenses.
Hmm.
So this is just a brief information, a breakdown on the state funding, of course, the CADE funding, and then with our local funding, we go to three counties and we have to submit budget requests to them based on our FTE, how many employees we have, and what the other counties and the state has given us, and the past 2 years of fiscal spending to all justify the need for an increase. And then I do break down the explanation of our tuition and fees. We're forecasting our head counts with the FTEs and making projections based on 2 fiscal years. It's all projections. Also, we could tie that into the figures for the revenue. So this is a main explanation that I had.
So can you enlighten us about maybe give some more details about the Kate formula, how it impacts particularly your college, and what are the important factors that, come to play into equation?
Okay, so the numbers that, of course, I said is 16 colleges. And the way that they do the CADE formula is they select four of the state four-year universities and calculate the FTEs for that. From that number that they calculate for the four-year colleges, that's what they're basing the FTE rate for the 16 colleges. So they go off of what was given 2 years before with with the calculation of the FTEs, and they do the whole breakdown in percentages. Some colleges are giving the small share, what is it called? Small share side ratio. So that's added in the formula. And I guess it's public information, but I have to dig and find it. So that ties into the whole formula, how they do the percentage based on per student and the FTEs. And even if your enrollments have gone up, like maybe they were looking at our numbers for FY 24 because they went up from FY 23. They're still doing the average. They're not counting in the high numbers. Well, they are, but it's an average. So it's not really justifying the need for the current year if they're doing the average. So they're basing their percentage on, again, on the FTEs. Um, right now, we know our enrollment rates have gone up, but it's just a formula where they're just strictly pulling from that number for the four-year universities, and it's not giving us the benefit of the numbers for the current fiscal year or the past fiscal year. They're just doing that 3-year average, and it's really harming some of the colleges, because we see some of the colleges get an increase, some don't get an increase, and it's just not fair. But rule of law is this is the CADE formula they have to follow to give us the state funding. So
That was helpful. Thank you.
yeah. And I wish I could have, I wanted to put it up here because I showed it to Martina when I did my interview to show her the breakdown and everything, because it's a whole lot of numbers and it took me a while to learn it, but it's just the numbers don't lie, but it's like I wish they can do more with it. We need more matrix to figure out what we're going to do for funding in the future without jeopardizing the colleges. Okay. So I'm back to expenses. So look at here. It's always, I always start with the biggest expense. What is the biggest expense? I know we talked about it earlier during our first week of class, and it is compensation. And this compensation includes everything tied to faculty, staff. It has tuition reimbursement, health insurance, everything, benefits, anything tied to an employee. This is the biggest portion of our expenses. So when we're looking at our revenues, we have to make sure, hey, this is our biggest area. How can we keep our staff here? We need staff, we need faculty to keep everything running. Um, so we understand that this is a big part of the pie, but we're like, we also need
Not
supplies.
surprising.
Huh?
Not very surprising.
No, 73% now. I've been told that anything closer to 75 is 75% of your operating budget is kind of risky. So we kind of stay within those limits, but then we also need the other areas. OPEB trust is our basic post-employee contribution. Supplies and materials, that's 3%. Contracted services, those ongoing needs for subscriptions, nursing, equipment, anything in the programs to support it, IT, big areas, even utilities, something like NeoEd, what we use for our training, our employees, all of that is in that piece of the pie. Then a smaller area of communications, 1%, conference and meetings. We've had to scrape the barrel with that. We had to cut back on that. Utilities, yeah, that should be under contracted services, but that's a small portion. Furniture and equipment, I'm sure that's 0.4%, never 0%, but something like that. We might look at moving that to a one-time expense, depending on what it is, so it won't be that much on our operating budget, knowing that we're receiving more decrease in revenue. Um, Can't touch scholarships and fellowships. That's just a small piece of a pie that we know the students need. Fixed expenses are those little credits, debits that come in. And that's about it for that piece of the pie. And then again, I talked about that compensation. We're also really good about trying to uplift and give employees a compensation study during the cycle. So we take a group of employees and make sure that they're getting close to the market pay as much as we can. And again, I talked about the supplies and materials, contracted services, communication, conference and meetings, and the fixed expenses, charges, utilities, and furniture and equipment. And basically, understanding the configuration of our operating budget allows the college to determine how the strategic goals and missions can be implemented to serve the institution and its students during the fiscal year. So that's one other thing I pointed out to my colleagues at the college. It's like you have to understand the whole piece of a pie. We have revenue coming in, but we also have to tie that into the bigger portion, which includes them as faculty and staff. So that's the biggest thing. So we also have other resources that are not tied to the operating budget. And they're in different areas, auxiliary services, foundation, but I deal with the grants. And then we have student organization and course fees. So they're a different part of our revenue stream that's completely far away from the budget, the operating budget. And those are just my resources. But I probably had more and I just didn't tie them in because I'm just twiddling with all the numbers and everything. But I'm really glad that I've had a chance to explain more in depth about the budget and everybody can understand the principles and everything. And I'm glad that I was able to put my knowledge to work as I present more and more to my colleagues at the university and going to the county commissioners and talking to the college president and other VPs. So I'm glad that they're learning alongside with me.
Fantastic. Great presentation.
Thank
Thank,
you.
thank you for quoting good source. Um, do you have any question, Martina or Kathryn?
So I actually interviewed Kathryn for one of my assignments. Um,
Okay, you
so there's
found the
lots of
right
questions
expert.
there, but I was wondering, you had mentioned that there's like a bonus funding for a small size school or something like that, which I know you had told me that CSM didn't get it. But is there anything specifically for community colleges in rural areas, like rural and underserved, like CSM is, or does that not factor into the budget at all?
I have to go back and look and research that because I'm learning more about that, but I noticed that they count that in, and I thought that our small size ratio would get something because we're in the
Mm,
southern part. So I thought that would count towards it. Um, but it's just those certain schools, and I don't know the principles behind that. I would love to learn more about that, why they get that extra bonus because of they're in a rural area. So I'm intrigued to find out. And I can't remember which college at hand had it, but I can get back to you on that.
sure.
Okay. Thank
Great
you.
question,
Thank
Martina.
you.
All right, thank you so much.
You're
It was a
welcome.
wonderful